I will start asking our speakers to introduce themselves and the work of the evaluation units they work in, and also to tell us when and where project cluster evaluations were introduced in your independent office of evaluation, and what was the purpose or rationale for doing project cluster evaluation in your specific case. So I will ask Mikal to start first. Please, Mikal, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Renata, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'll briefly tell you a few words about IFAD, my organization, and about how we do project cluster evaluations. So next slide, please. So IFAD, you may know, it's international financial institutions and a specialized agency of the United Nations. So it's unique in that it has both of those aspects. The mandate is to focus on the rural poor and to alleviate poverty in rural areas. The instruments that IFAD has at its disposal for its mandate are loans and grants, essentially. So providing loans and grants to its member countries, to governments. Currently, it has a portfolio of 209 investment projects in 93 countries worldwide, and for a total value of 8 billion currently. So it's not the largest of the international financial institutions. It's in fact one of the smallest. Then my specific office, the Independent Office of Evaluation, IOE, has evolved since IFAD's inception from a monitoring kind of unit in 2011 to a fully fledged independent organization office. And we're currently staffed by 24 people, all based in HQ. So we don't have a decentralized model. We are all based in IFAD headquarters in Rome, Italy. And our mandate is to conduct independent assessments of IFAD operations for accountability and learning. Next slide. So here you see some of our products, some of our outputs. So on the far left, you see the annual report on results and impact. So this is a synthesis of the findings of all the evaluations which are done in a certain year. Then we do something called project completion report validations, which are basically an assessment of the self-reporting that IFAD does at the end of its projects. We have corporate level evaluations, thematic ones. Then we have project performance evaluations. So these are focusing on specific projects. And we have synthesis. We have a few impact evaluations as well. And we have country strategy and program evaluation, CSPEs. Next slide, please. So when it comes to project cluster evaluation, this is a relatively new product for us. It was introduced in 2021, and it was introduced because IOE had an external review of its work. And one of the recommendations that we received was to diversify our product mix in order to enhance learning. So at that time, this approach of project cluster evaluations came into being. And so far, we only finalized one PCE, which is the one you see in the slide there, the image. And the second one is currently being finalized now. So when it comes to clustering criteria, what do we mean by the cluster? This has been debated a lot within our office. And the guiding principle that we have to define this cluster is that it has to maximize learning through comparison of similar projects in areas that are important or major areas of investment for IFAD. So there needs to be some comparability, and it needs to be a strategic area of importance for the organization. And how do we do this was through a portfolio analysis done by IOE to identify the major areas of investment, while also consulting with IFAD management about what their learning needs are. So it's a very learning-oriented product. In the PCs so far, we've covered 3 to 5 projects which have a similar thematic focus, but operate in different countries, and in some cases, even in different regions. By the way, when I say project, we mean a unit which is maybe 4 to 10 years in time, focusing on one country, and a size perhaps between $40 to $50 million up to more than 300 million, depending on the co-financing. So that's what that scale we're talking about in projects. Of course, there are pros and cons to combining ongoing and completed projects. And these PCEs come with a number of benefits and challenges that we'll discuss more throughout the session. Thank you. That's all from my side.
Seda, go ahead, please.
Hello, colleagues. Welcome to our session. I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, which is a specialized agency tasked with defeating hunger worldwide and with a goal of achieving food security for all. We operate on basis of 4 betters: better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life for all, leaving nobody behind. So I will present also briefly the Office of Evaluation. Thank you, Renata. The mission of our office is to enable well-informed decisions, to support and promote culture of evidence and decision-making. Our vision is to generate evidence, recommendations that inform thinking, deliberations, and ultimately and importantly, decisions of the organization, its members, donors, partners, and other stakeholders in support of the 2030 Agenda, through the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for the 4 betters that I already mentioned. We have recently come up with a new strategy this year, which I take the opportunity to present to the key points of how we're going to pursue this mission and vision by generating robust, useful evidence that supports learning and accountability, making potentially transformative recommendations to FAO stakeholders, and contributing knowledge to the fields in which FAO operates. As far as cluster evaluations go, here are recent examples of where we have clustered some projects into a single evaluation. So one is the final evaluation of FAO projects sponsored by the GEF on the capacity building initiative for transparency under the Paris Agreement. And another one, again, GEF projects, Global Environmental Facility Project, on fisheries, sustainable fisheries management in the areas beyond national jurisdiction. To give you some background about how these clusters came about and how the rationale indeed of how we decided to cluster projects into single evaluations, it had a lot to do with efficiency because these were individually small projects under the Transparency Initiative program. And we felt like it would make much more sense to put them together, also in order for us to see really efficiency in how we use our resources, human resources, financial resources, and time resources at the Office of Evaluation. We also had agreement from the Global Environment Facility that it would be acceptable to do a cluster evaluation. And in case of the final evaluations of the areas beyond national jurisdiction projects, there was a coordination, a larger coordination project, and then a few of the individual projects were clustered under that as well into one single evaluation. So that is as far as introduction goes, and thank you.
Joseph, thanks, Seda. Joseph, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to present the premier development finance institution on the continent, namely the African Development Bank. So I will first present the African Development Bank and later present the independent development evaluation before jumping to the cluster evaluation. So the African Development Bank is an old institution created in 1964. Our HQ is located in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And our main mission is to promote sustainable economic growth and reduce poverty in Africa. The bank achieves this objective by mobilizing and allocating resources for investment in our regional member country, and by providing policy advice and technical assistance to support development effort. In terms of priority, we have what we call the high five. First one is light up and power Africa, so related to energy. The second one is feeding Africa, related to agriculture. The third one is integrated Africa. The fourth one is industrialize Africa. And the last one to improve the quality of life for people. Next slide. The African Development Bank Group was ranked by Global Finance as the best multilateral financial institution in the world in 2021. And we are also ranked by CGD second best in the world, ahead of all 28 concessional finance institutions in developed countries. We are also ranked 3AA, and it gives us the opportunity to leverage a lot of finance from our regional member country. Next slide. The independent development evaluation is independent, impartial unit dedicated to enhance the development effectiveness of the African Development Bank in its regional member country. Through independent and influential evaluation, we also oversight our self-evaluation process and product, and we proactively engage with evaluation partnership and knowledge sharing. All of IDEV activity are designed to meet the following three objectives: accountability, learning, and evaluation culture. To do this, IDEV carry out independent evaluation of bank operation, policy, and strategy, working across project, sector, team, region, and country. By conducting independent evaluation and proactively sharing best practice, IDEV ensure that the bank and its stakeholders learn from past experience and plan and deliver development activity to the highest possible standard. Next slide. About the cluster evaluation. For a long time, we was doing what we call a project performance evaluation report. So the focus was a lot on project evaluation. But since 2013, we start thinking about the possibility of doing an evaluation of a group of projects. And officially in our 2013 and 2015 work program, we decide to mix our product and also to move from a project level to what we call high level evaluation, including sector, thematic, corporate also. And now for project level evaluation, what we are doing now just to validate the project completion report prepared by operation department, also we focus on rigorous impact evaluation. And the third aspect at project level is the cluster evaluation. Why are we doing this cluster evaluation? The main reason is because of limitation of one single project evaluation knowledge in terms of transferability and external validity. And it's intended to learn from experience across the cluster, a certain community and different and draw lesson. One strength for this cluster evaluation is because often it's led to identification of good practice, and also we obtain strong finding when evaluating a single intervention in a single location. And I may emphasize on the fact that here we are mainly doing formative evaluation, and our main objective is learning. And consequently, after each cluster evaluation, we organize what we call a capitalization workshop with stakeholders. It's help to share finding with all stakeholders and to decide what kind of action the operational department can take into account. So I will not talk a lot on the methodology because maybe we can come back, but let's say that there is no specific methodology. We are using mainly a theory-based approach, but sometimes also we use a process approach. And in terms of sampling, we are using a purposive sampling method. And often our cluster evaluation inform a broader sector or thematic evaluation. But in some case, it can be a standalone product without any link with any thematic or sector evaluation. A specificity of this cluster is that we are using a common cluster instrument because we are using a different location, but it's important to use a common data collection protocol, data collection, and also data analysis. For that, we are using a network of local consultants. We have a better understanding of the context of operation where we are working. So it's a mean we need to have a lot of technical assistance. As a cluster evaluator, we need to have a lot of technical assistance to help the local consultant to do their job. Next. So here is just some example of our cluster evaluation. The first group was informing the broader bank assistant for water sector. The second group was for energy sector. And one on resource management was a standalone product without any link with any sector or thematic evaluation. Just to mention that for each our sector evaluation, we used to do cluster evaluation, but not all cluster evaluation are considered as a standalone product and published. So it can be just an internal document or a background document for a sector evaluation. Let me stop here.
Thanks, Joseph. And now over to Carlos.
Well, hello, I am Carlos Asenjo. I'm Evaluation Officer at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. I will go very quickly about what we do in the independent evaluation section and what UNODC, and then also provide a very quick overview about our efforts on cluster evaluations. Next slide, please. So the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime aims at helping the world be safer from drugs, organized crime, corruption, and terrorism. It's an organization based in Vienna, but with activities in some 100 countries and 130 physical locations, and it was established in 1997 with some slight additions to the mandate in 2022. Next slide, please. Within the organization, the independent evaluation section, IES, is the evaluation function, and we have the mandate to ensure that there is independent evaluation practice in UNODC in order to contribute to improve the office's accountability, decision-making, and also to contribute to learning by fostering the practice of evaluation. We are operationally independent and report directly, since the head of the IES in UNODC reports directly on evaluation results to the executive director and to member states. Next slide, please. Our bread and butter is the conduct of evaluations, and also to provide quality assurance and overseeing for evaluation processes of some evaluations that are undertaken by other units within UNODC. In order to make sure that the norms and standards of evaluation of the United Nations evaluation group are met. We also do evaluation capacity development and support to country-led efforts by member states to strengthening national evaluation capacity. And we also do activities about generation of and sharing of knowledge from evaluations, including meta-synthesis, participation and in events on evaluation like this one, and so on. Next slide, please. As for the practice of independent evaluations in clusters, we have been carrying them out since 2015. The opportunities for such evaluations has been fluctuating over these years, but there is an increased demand of them, especially in the context of the ongoing reform of the United Nations, which stresses the need for more strategic and impactful evaluations as for the decision-making and accountability at the highest levels. Next slide, please. So the main purpose for the introduction of cluster evaluations in UNODC has been first to increase efficiency of evaluation processes, to optimize the use of resources and both material, financial and human resources, but also to try to reduce the risk of evaluation fatigue, because we have a very, like many other entities, I'm sure, fragmented portfolio of activities, and we always have the same, let's say, contributors to the evaluation processes as for interviews, to provide feedback on draft evaluation reports, to participate in the dissemination of evaluation results. And in the long run, we think that it's a risk to have too much atomized evaluation efforts. Also, there is the great importance of by putting projects together into the single evaluation, we can address more effectively evaluation questions at the more strategic and higher level. As for the selection criteria, they have been historically opportunistic, the reasons for clustering projects into a single evaluation, but there are most of them these 4 criteria. Basically, we have put together evaluations that have the similar subject or something that is adjacent or complementary. Like, for instance, we had recently an evaluation on migrant smuggling and human trafficking efforts in Mexico. These are 2 topics that are very much related to each other, and that it was interesting to look at them jointly. Also, as for geographic scope, like there are some regional program evaluations that have been undertaken by undertaking cluster evaluations that individually wouldn't have been possible because of resources for a start. Then also, when there is an overlap of institutional counterparts, to avoid precisely evaluation fatigue. And for instance, there was this evaluation on UNODC's work on crime prevention and border control in Central Asia, where we had the same counterparts with different projects as for law enforcement agencies, border control, central valley, etc. And finally, the opportunity to focus on strategic aspects, like, for instance, there was a cluster evaluation on drug dependency and treatment disorder. And here this gave us the opportunity to put together different projects that were like, we could look at it as a joint effort and between UNODC and the World Health Organization, and how that could inform shifts in focus of policies, rather than looking at the lower level outcomes of each individual projects. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos, also all speakers. I want to now see, we'd like to see in our audience who has already experience with the project cluster evaluation, just to have an idea on what the experience is in this webinar today. So I'll just launching a quick poll. Can you see it? So just to see if you have experience with cluster evaluation, how many of you have experience with this type of evaluation? I see you're still voting. Okay, I'll end the poll and share results. So most of participants with us today, can you see it? Have no experience so far with the cluster evaluation. So yes, as we said at the beginning, it's not such a common approach. So good to have this session today to learn more about it. I wonder if those few that said yes have something to share at this point, or any question or comment on the experience shared so far by our panelists. If there's anything, please, you can either come forward or just share in the chat, or we can also address comments later. I don't think there's, yes, I see that there are a few comments. A comment by Abubakar, this is my first time of hearing cluster evaluation, which is fine. So let me go back again to our panelists with a question then, to start off this discussion. We mentioned this, especially in the presentation by African Development Bank by Joseph. He also anticipated some of the specific methodologies, but I was wondering, perhaps starting with Mikhail again, if there are specific methodologies for cluster evaluations which you have been using in IFAD. In this example you showed us, which differ from other type of evaluations you do in the Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD. Please, Mikhail.
Yeah, when it comes to methodologies, in general, we have the same set of mixed methods. So that's the same for cluster evaluations and for others. But specifically, what's different for cluster evaluations is that we try and combine methods that come from the synthesis, evaluation synthesis, with methods that come from project evaluation. This means that what you will find in cluster evaluations, for example, is a lot of these comparative tables, whereby we compare different aspects of the projects. So we want to understand, for example, the approach to project design or to targeting under relevance criteria. So we have these comparative methods that come from synthesis, but at the same time, we also do the classical project assessment, so covering evaluation criteria, so very much with the same methods as project evaluations. And so these PCEs also go through the same quality assurance as any other IO evaluation. So there's that level also of checking. Another methodological difference is that in many of the IFAD evaluations, we assign ratings to the things we're evaluating. So there's a rating scale of 1 to 6, whereas in project cluster evaluation, at least so far, we are not doing this because of the learning aspect. We found that when ratings are given, there's a lot of discussion on those, and not so much on the.
So I get 2 assignments, or maybe 3 one that help me. Yeah.
I think somebody is leaving their mic open.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Sorry. So the other couple of things on methodologies. Another aspect, it's related to methodology, but it's the report structure of the PCE. And there's been a lot of discussion around this. The standard approach is to present findings and conclusion by evaluation criteria, which is what we're all familiar with. But in cluster evaluations, because we're trying to do this cross comparison and learning, we're introducing some sections of the reports being organized by key issues. So these are issues that we identify as important across these projects. And so, for example, in the one that's coming out now, we are combining a criteria approach in the findings, but then we are using the key issues to present our lessons and conclusions, because those really speak more to the evaluands and ensure that they absorb these lessons. And the final one to methodology, it's sometimes we face this challenge of balancing project-specific findings with more generalized findings. So because we're combining an assessment of projects plus some more synthesis aspect, we have to balance these two things. So we had some solutions to that, which is basically presenting it in both ways. So that's what I can say on methodologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll ask Carlos then to come forward with the methodologies in your cluster evaluation in UNODC.
Yes, thank you. Well, the same as with IFAD's experience, we don't have a specific approach or methodology for cluster evaluations. We do the same as with all independent evaluations in UNODC, mixed methods. What we have seen is that there are some specificities of how you need to plan for the evaluation and undertake the evaluation and apply these methods that it is useful to include in guidance for evaluators. So what we have been doing basically over these years is to develop some specific guidance. And for the first time this year, we have piloted draft terms of reference for evaluations, templates for evaluation reports that have been applied for a team of evaluators that have undertaken one cluster evaluation, and also have been updating the flowchart in this regard. This evaluation is almost finalized, so after that we will be able to draw lessons from these templates and post them on ISS website as with all the templates we have.
Thanks, Carlos. And now, Joseph, can you elaborate a bit on methodologies?
Yeah, thank you. Like I did mention, we are doing a project level evaluation, but depending on your objective, if the objective is just learning, maybe we not focus on rating, for instance. But if you have to inform a thematic or a sector evaluation, sometimes you need to have rating. And for that, there is a different level of rating. The first level will be the project, individually the project rating. And you need also to design the sector level rating. When can you say that for this cluster, it's satisfactory or not satisfactory? Things should be clear before writing the synthesis. You know exactly what kind of rating we'll be using for this at the synthesis level. And also, most of our cluster evaluation is just for learning. Here, the issue of having a common data protocol for collecting and analyzing information is critical. And often you are using local consultant, and you know, consultants are in different area with different experience. As a cluster evaluator, you need to help consultant to have the same way, otherwise it will be difficult at the end to synthesize. And we should keep also in mind when it's about learning, the cluster is not intended to determine whether the project is a success or not success. But we are trying to identify some good practice within the cluster. And also the issue is not about generalizing the finding. Even if we are trying to improve the transferability of finding, the aim is not to generalize. It's not because your cluster, because most of them, the maximum will be maybe 10 projects. You cannot use this 10 project to statistically say it represent your portfolio. So you need to be careful in terms of on trying to generalize your finding. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Seda, can you tell us a bit about methodologies on your side?
Yes, I want to, well, I agree with the colleagues' interventions, and I want to echo a few of them. One, as Mikhail mentioned, key issues, and then Joseph's complement to that, good practices. I think that has been quite useful for us, in addition to replying to the donor's requirements. We kind of had no choice because the donor has strict requirements that they require certain information to be in the report and certain criteria, etc. It was really useful to have these sections on good practices and then bringing out some programmatic level issues that we would not be able to do if it wasn't for a cluster evaluation. So that also goes to say that the questions that we pick, evaluation questions for a cluster evaluation, in my opinion, should include the programmatic level questions and the higher level questions, and that can be quite beneficial and one of the advantages of a cluster evaluation.
Thanks, Seda. Before going to the next question, I see some questions in the chat. So there was one question by one participant who's not Mikhail Khan, but is I think someone who entered with the same link, perhaps. So just to clarify, but there's about the how the cluster evaluations are being used. What has been the main changes in terms of decision making as a result of conducting cluster evaluation? I think said that you already partly responded to this. Perhaps if you want to elaborate a bit on your response, or yeah.
This relates also. There's another question about the audience for cluster evaluation.
Yes,
in our case, we had also demand from the project teams, and they agreed that this will be a cluster evaluation. And we're particularly looking forward to being able to influence future programmatic directions of this global environmental facility umbrella of the CBIT. So I think in that sense, it was once again very useful to do a cluster approach. The audience, the project teams, the individual project teams still remain part of the audience for the evaluation. So I think they're also very important to consider and in fact manage expectations of the individual project teams, because by definition, the cluster evaluation cannot be as detailed as the individual evaluations. Sorry, I went just slightly off track here because I answered part of the question in the chat already.
Okay, no, perfectly fine. There's another question by Catherine Bukai around differentiation between the cluster evaluations and meta evaluations, or if there's no difference. Who wants to respond to Catherine?
I think
Carlos.
Okay.
Carlos, go ahead.
Oh, no, just perhaps very quickly from my understanding, meta evaluation is a specific methodology where you would like to aggregate findings, and you are most interested in, like Joseph mentioned, on the evaluations they undertake on external validity issues. For that, you need an homogeneous and relatively large sample of evaluations that you can combine to be able to meet those goals. Cluster evaluations is a more broader, it's a broader concept, and in our case, that's what we do. We put together projects that are similar, that we see that there is a potential as for utilization of these evaluation results. There's a potential for putting these evaluations together into a single one, in our case, to inform decisions and learning at a higher level or a strategic level. I don't know if there's other views on.
Perhaps Joseph wants to add something. Thanks, Carlos, for responding. Joseph, you wanted to intervene on this?
I think Carlos already covered my answer, but just to mention that here it's also about synthesis, but you are synthesizing evaluation from different type of evaluation. And the additional aspect is we are also assessing the value, I think, of each evaluation, the quality of each evaluation. When you are selecting the evaluation you want to use to synthesize, let's say that the main difference is that in meta evaluation, you are using evaluation done by different, you can use evaluation done by different institutional, in different period. It's just about a subject. So you want to make a synthesis on evaluation finding from different evaluation done by different. I can do it for evaluation done by different development partners. But in the cluster evaluation, you are doing your cluster evaluation on your institutional portfolio and so and so.
Thank you, Joseph. I see another question by Abubakar. So in evaluation, in cluster evaluation, can we use evaluation approaches such as contribution analysis? Mikhail, do you want to respond to this?
Yes, absolutely. Because as we were saying, the cluster evaluation includes an element of project evaluation. So it includes a direct primary assessment of that project. So in that sense, we are assessing aspects of effectiveness or sustainability or these kind of criteria where a method like contribution analysis would be very useful. That, of course, has to be combined with more synthesis comparative methods. So you need to ensure that whatever you're finding with that method can be compared with the other projects in your cluster. That's from our side.
If I may add, I think that it may be useful to clarify, when we speak about cluster evaluations, it's not really about the methods that we use. It's more about the evaluant, about what we are evaluating. What makes the definition of a cluster evaluation is that we are putting together several things that could be evaluated separately, but we deem it more useful to evaluate them jointly. And as for that, you can use many types of methodologies. We usually do mixed methods because it's more suitable to the type of projects that we do in UNODC, but other entities can perhaps undertake rigorous impact evaluations, like measuring impacts, and then maybe even be able to put them together into some study that would have a stronger credibility in terms of external validity. But that's because their questions of that evaluations would be on what is the impact of all these types of similar interventions.
Thank you, Carlos and Joseph, for responding. So I have a question, another question for you. If you could share the lessons you have drawn from cluster evaluations, and I'll ask Seda to go first this time.
Thank you. So managing expectations, as mentioned, previously already touched on this, especially in my experience, it has been really being very clear about what the final evaluation report will look like and how much detail it will have for individual level interventions. Careful organization, because we are clustering several things into one. I think the evaluation manager must be very organized. And for that, it helps also to create a platform where we share all kinds of documents from the different interventions, different projects, where we attend also programmatic level events and conduct that level of interviews, etc. We hired more than one lead evaluator, or let's say senior evaluator, to conduct this, just because of the size of the evaluation. And finally, I think the end dates of, let's say you're clustering project into one evaluation, the end dates are quite important of this project, because they have to be somewhat on the same level in order, I think, to have a successful cluster evaluation. Otherwise, you lose a lot of primary data sources.
Thanks, Seda. And your lessons, Carlos, from your
Thank
side?
you. Yes. Well, from our experience, what it is really very important is when considering about a cluster evaluation is to clarify before initiating the evaluation some aspects, like most importantly, what is the intended use and the target users and the level of the decision makers that the evaluation is going to be addressed to, and also the evaluation scope, to be able to determine before undertaking the evaluation what is going to be the balance between what is going to be assessed at the whole level, in the strategic level of the evaluation, and as for the individual projects. And we have found more useful to have a stronger role at the strategic questions rather than the individual projects. But sometimes the expectations of stakeholders is that some projects will be assessed more in depth because the main donor that is funding this joint evaluation effort would like to see reflected that investment in the evaluation in terms of more in-depth knowledge of that project, for instance. So clarifying all these aspects from the very onset before the evaluation is clear to be initiated, I think that is critical. Also, sometimes it has been useful to establish one case study or two cases studies to be able to balance this need to focus on the strategic level and these specific demands for more in-depth knowledge of some components of the evaluation. Also, more broadly speaking, I think that we have learned that the evaluations that are clustered can be more efficient than taking, let's say, 16 projects and evaluating them separately. However, that doesn't mean that a cluster evaluation comes at no cost, because sometimes they are individually more time consuming and resource consuming than one individual evaluation. However, I think that the balance pays off, and it's a good practice, overall, to avoid evaluation fatigue. Then, in order to make them happen and be actually well implemented, it's very important to have very good coordination and communication mechanisms established from the beginning. Also, for instance, to designate a focal point. Let's say that we have 10 projects that are going to be evaluated at the same time. It's critical to have someone who takes responsibility from all these projects and appoint someone who is the main focal point to coordinate with the evaluation team and be able to provide for what the evaluation team needs to do their job. And well, just also keep in mind that in the end, the evaluation is going to take longer than a normal evaluation, because it will progress at the pace that is established by the slowest contributor. So if one of the STEM projects provides the information that is critical for the evaluation late, that is going to delay the whole process. So it's important to, in order to manage the expectations, and it's very important to have that plan from the beginning, so that they are, and also as for the expectations of when the evaluation results will be available for key stakeholders.
I see, before handing over to the others for their lessons, I see there's an interesting comment by Waref from Islamic Development Bank. It's indeed, as we mentioned at the beginning, there are also experience from other agencies and banks that with cluster evaluation. I wonder if Waref wants to come in to briefly share his experience. If you are there, Waref. Or perhaps he cannot hear us. Waref?
Yes, hi.
Hi. Thanks for sharing your comment. I wonder if you'd like to add a few information about your experience at the Islamic Development Bank with the cluster evaluation. So you're saying that you use them. Yes, go ahead, please.
This is Warif Karashuli from the Islamic Development Bank. And we do have 57 member countries. We are very similar institution, to the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and African Development Bank. The only difference, we are serving local communities outside of the membership. So that means out of the 57 member countries, we are serving local communities in the countries where we don't have, they don't have membership with us, such as India, Rwanda, and other countries. And in those countries, we do provide special assistance. For example, those are projects that are related, for example, to develop schools, or maybe, for example, community centers, hospitals, and for the communities, in fact. And it can be considered as small operations, and it flow exactly the same flow. However, when we look at the portfolio of the special assistance within one country, we do have a kind of cluster of variations that we conduct usually, just to see the efficiency, the impact on the ground, and what else we can do for like to enhance the livelihood of people around the in those countries. And of course, we do collect lessons learned, recommendation for the way forward. I just want to share this. This is exactly what we used to do, but of course, when we talk about cluster evaluations, this was part of our guiding principle. So basically, we do a kind of sampling selection of those countries, and based also on the activation, on how much active the portfolio of the project or the special assistance program within those countries. And currently, we are conducting one cluster evaluation in India, and we just completed another one in Rwanda. And this is what I can share at this moment. Of course, I have a lot of things to say, but for the sake of time, I just want to say this. Thank you so much. Over to you.
But thanks so much for sharing, because this really enriches our discussion, and perhaps we can also link after this webinar and collect also your resources and for sharing them back with the audience of today. I think we will also have some follow-up in terms of a blog, at least summarizing the main takeaways from this this webinar. So you will hear more about it. I can assure all participants here today about this. So just to continue on the lessons, I don't know if Joseph wants to share some of his lessons from conducting project cluster evaluation in African Development Bank.
Okay, thank you. I think I already talked about specific aspects that are important for cluster. The first one is the use of local consultant who understand the intervention context, and a common data collection analysis protocol are critical at project level, because in cluster evaluation, context matter. Mm-hmm. So you need to have someone definitely who understands the context. And secondly, there is a question of what do you want to put in the cluster? Do you want to have just a completed project, or you want to have also ongoing project? What happens generally when you use completed project, let's say, for instance, for infrastructure project that took more than 8 years to be completed? Sometimes your lesson, for when you're presenting your lesson, people will say, but what you are saying, we are already addressing this kind of aspect. So it looks like it's not relevant actually. So sometimes it's important for the evaluative information to be impactful, to have in your cluster some recent project. For that recent project, you are not looking for a result, but you can address the issue of quality, and because even if nothing is being doing, but when you are presenting your lesson based only on completed project, you will receive this kind of remark, or you say, we are moving. You are saying something that is too late for us. So it's important sometimes to include in your cluster sampling completed and ongoing project. And lastly, in our institutional, for each evaluation, we send the report to the management. They prepare a management response. And our report and the management response we say to the board of directors. But for the cluster, because it's just for learning, it doesn't require a management response. So how to do or to make sure that our finding or lesson will be used? This is where capitalization workshop become critical for stakeholder, because after the capitalization workshop, we present a one-page outcome for this workshop. And the one page, together with the main report, will send for information to the board. So it means that the operation department already identifies some takeaway from the evaluation without having a formal management response. So, three main lessons: the use of local consultant, the integration of more recent evaluation in your sampling, and the need for having a capitalization workshop because it's based on learning.
Thank you, Joseph. And Mikhail, over to you for any lessons you want to share.
Thanks. I'll try to be brief because a couple of things mentioned were exactly the same as us in terms of coverage efficiency. So with clustering, clearly you can cover more with less resources in terms of mission, travel, consultants, and all that. Of course, this works better if the projects you're evaluating are in the same geographical region, so that you can combine travel, and then this will be cost saving. Another lesson that we have so far, I mean, we've only done 2 so far, so it's still early days, but we see that there's a clear appreciation by the evaluants of this approach, in the sense that they don't have really any other evaluation instrument that compares projects in this very targeted and specific way. So this is something they really value. So the learning aspect is definitely there. And to respond to an earlier question about the use of cluster evaluations, the main use here is to the new project design. This is the main entry point that we have for use. And we're receiving so far good feedback on this. Then another lesson we have is around recommendations, because like AFDB, our first cluster evaluations didn't have any recommendations. We only had lessons, and we didn't envisage a management response. But then when presenting that evaluation to our stakeholders and to the governing bodies, we got a clear feedback that they want recommendations. They want recommendations for the new project designs based on the lessons. So that's something we adjusted in the second one we're doing. So now we have included recommendations and management response. Also, I share the same lesson for ongoing versus closed projects to be included in the cluster. There's pros and cons for each. Closed projects, usually you have better data available, you have more assessments done, but maybe the team that was managing the project is no longer in place. So you have difficulty finding the stakeholders to interview. Whereas ongoing projects, you'll have the team in place, they'll help you to facilitate your data collection, but then they'll have less monitoring data available. So far what we've done is a mix of the two. And a final lesson, which is more of a challenge and also relates to Abu Bakar's comment on how to combine lessons if you're evaluating different projects. So what we've seen so far is that you cannot always synthesize everything. So some aspects will remain project specific, and it's hard to draw a common lesson or finding from them. But then other areas will be common, and so those are the ones that you want to focus on in the evaluation. So these are some emerging lessons, but we are still learning by doing, because this is all work in progress. Thank you.
So thank you all. I see some people are also leaving, so perhaps we can go towards the conclusions, and I'll ask a last question to all of you of what do you think is the future of cluster evaluation in your office? So if we could go round, perhaps again starting from Seda.
Yes, I think we will continue to use an ad hoc approach and in fact increase our volume of cluster evaluations, because in accordance with the new strategy, we're really putting a lot of thought into what we're evaluating and why and how it responds to the learning needs and decision-making needs of the organization. So in that sense, the cluster can be one of the answers.
Thank you. Carlos, you want to go ahead with the future in your office?
Yes, we have included we revised our evaluation policy last year and included this specific possibility of undertaking cluster evaluations in the new policy. And now also we are having a new process for planning our evaluations every year in a systematic way. And in the plan for this year, we have 2 cluster evaluations included, and in the next year we will have another, and they are on the onset now. So we really cannot anticipate whether this is going to increase or not, but we have set up the framework to allow to address that increased demand when it comes, if it materializes.
Mikal, you want to go ahead with your lessons? Thanks.
Yeah,
Carlos.
in the future, we also have one tentatively planned for 2025, which is on water management in the Near East region. But this is still tentative because there's a strong demand for all our evaluation products. So we'll have to see what can be feasibly done. But definitely the plan is to continue them in some way in the future.
And Joseph, you have the widest experience. So.
On our part, there is a need depth on the future of cluster evaluation, just because project cluster evaluation are part of our product mix, including in the work program approved by Board of Directors.
So thank you very much. I want to see if our audience has any further comment or question about what we heard today from our panelists. Or if not, we can draw to conclusions. And I just wanted to say, as I said at the beginning, we will share the recording of the session and also the presentation. Abubakar, please come in. Abubakar.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your different knowledge. Some of us, we are new into the aspect of evaluation, and we hope to continue to learn from you, the advanced guys. So I requested, is this Seda email, as we are in the same food promotion area, so that I can learn more of how they are doing their own stuff of evaluation. Thank you very much. I hope this will continue. This session will continue. And all to the presenter, the panelists, I want to warmly give you a big thank for at least making me know about what we call cluster evaluation. And I will endeavor to learn more about it. Then if there is available materials that we can use or they can support us to learn from it, I think that would be more appreciated. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Abubakar. We are glad to hear this session was helpful. As we saw also from the poll, many of the participants today didn't have any previous experience with cluster evaluation. So I think this gave a good overview of what is going on in some of the agencies that are active in this area. And we will share the recording and the presentation and also the resources which have been posted by Emil, who I want to thank for being also in the background of this webinar, in helping with the chat and with the setup of the event. Hi, Emil. So he posted some of the resources on the chat, but we will share them also with the participants, and we could aim to have a a summary with the different elements that came from your experience and the lessons and the different challenges that cluster evaluation bring, the opportunities and the challenges. I liked very much the learning aspect of the cluster evaluation, which was emphasized in particular by many of you, but in particular by African Development Bank, and the capitalization of the experience that you do with the follow-up events that you have with stakeholders. I think that's a very interesting approach, but there were many elements that were interesting and to take on board for thinking about cluster evaluations. So I think that is all for me for the moment. I don't know if you want to have a final word from our panelists, any final reflection, even a few words. Carlos,
just one final, perhaps additional thought is, I think that what we have been discussing today, I have really found extremely interesting from experiences from the other colleagues from the floor and from the panel. But I think that there's high potential for cross-fertilization as for learning with other discussions that are ongoing on other types of evaluation. Like, for instance, there is the joint evaluations. I think that what they are discussing there, it can be also very informative, and they can benefit of this discussion as for things that have been mentioned here, like how this putting together evaluation efforts affects the evaluation timeline, management of expectations of different stakeholders, the balance between the different components of the evaluation. Also, as for system-wide evaluations that we are supposed to increase and contribute to these system-wide evaluation efforts of the UN, the focus that very often cluster evaluations have at the strategic high level, I think that this discussion can really be informative and benefit of whatever they are discussing in relation with system-wide evaluation. So I'm very excited to hear more developments in that regard.
Thank you, Carlos. Indeed, this is very important to take into consideration all these developments and parallel discussions in the evaluation community. Anyone else wants to add a final word from our panelists? Or otherwise we close this session. And yes,
I just want to thank Mikal for leading this webinar and giving opportunity to African Development to showcase its experience on cluster evaluation. Thank you so much, Mikal.
I join your thanks, Joseph, also to Mikal, who took the lead on this. So I think we can close. Thanks to all participants. I see that a few have other commitments, and after more than 1 hour, they tend to leave. So, but I think I saw that the audience was very engaged and interested in this topic. So I'm very glad of this. I think we can all be happy of this knowledge sharing today in the context of the G-Local. And I'd like to invite those people who are still there to join also the Eval4, the community of practice, which is jointly led by the evaluation offices of FAO, IFAD, WFP, and CGIAR. It's a community of practice on evaluation, particularly focused on agriculture, food security, and rural development. So thanks again for being with us today, and see you next time at the G-Local events or other events. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to you, Renata, for your facilitation.
Bye-bye. Stop recording.